Yo guys, this is Rich, and in this video I want to show you how I made my track No Limits, which got released on Spinnin Records, HEXAGON, on Don Diablo's own label. Let's just have a look at the project, how I could make such a banger. The very first idea of the track was actually I wanted to combine Psytrance elements with Future House sounds. If you look at the bass layers in my drop, you can clearly see that the rhythm is very similar to a Psytrance kind of track. It has triplets and it's very constant. Usually there are some other bass elements in there to give it more energy. I tried to build a track which has a lot of rhythm and a catchy melody as well. So my very first thought about my own track was it sounded kind of like a pirate song, which could be in the parts of the Caribbean maybe, because it's so rhythmical and so medieval in a way, but also very interesting. Not the most Western melodic structure, so it was kind of funny to play with as well while producing. I can show you the main lead of the drop. If I turn off every effect on this main lead, it's basically just a saw wave, so I tend to build my leads very simple and make all the post-processing afterwards with a lot of stock plugins and some more complex plugins or like better sounding ones. I tend to distort my leads a bit with overdrive and a lot of ODT as well. In this case it was 33%. Work with a lot of flangers as well and a lot of automations. Like I just make an automation that sounds quite good and I just copy paste it over the whole melody, so it gives a lot of more movement. Just look at the pitch bend automations or the cutoff automations or like the mod envelope attack times. It gives so much more movement. It causes that the lead sometimes comes quicker or like still needs a bit of time to actually give a certain sound or a certain energy, so it makes it more human and more dynamic as well. In this track I tended to experiment a lot. That's why the project is very big as well, because I try to combine so many things. I have the second break, as you all know. Oh, I hope at least that you know, has a kind of like an 80s styled break, which I had to choose again new samples and new snares and new elements to make it sound more realistic or like authentic. This is how my effect chains are as well. I just tried and like combined a lot until it sounded quite decent. These are some automations which weren't used anymore or only as a transitional element. So for example right here, this flanger. I also really like to exaggerate effects and plugins, because you get a different sound design than probably the other guy. Most of the producers have any rules in their head. For example, I can't use this plugin that way. Why not? If it sounds very extreme and probably sick as well, why don't just do it? It may sound cheesy, but if it sounds good, why don't do it? At least for a sound design-ish aspect. Afterwards, I've cut my lead a bit with an EQ to just cut the low end. I have a certain reverb plugin which I really like. It's called Ambience, and its reverb qualities are very cool and very realistic as well. And I like to automate a lot of reverb as well, just to give the whole track a lot of more energy. And also, like, for example, this automation is very like short, briefly, but this gives the character of rhythm way more power, and it's a really cool style of use or like of using reverb, which I basically do every time or like in almost every track. So on the build-up I use a lot of redux and reverb as well. When the lead is getting more open and more bright with a filter, I still try to build up even more energy. It's already there, but wait a second, I will take it back one more time and then I will give it a shot with the drop. Just to wash it out more and to give it more distance and just to build it up better. What is also really important for building a track is to keep track with your transitions. For example, with this lead before the second half of the whole drop begins, I use the Swan imager, and what I do is, for example, I take this lead and I just take its width and just make it more mono. So when something new is coming, I just let something else disappear in the middle, like to the middle of both of ears. So something new, which is going to be pretty wide as well, has more impact again. It's kind of like a surprising effect, of course. If I just play the kicks, the percussion effect, and the main melody or the bass, it sounds like this. The main lead wouldn't be as fat as it is if I hadn't added more layers to it. I have this main lead, but what I did is I just copied and pasted this layer like it was. I just took it and duplicated it like 4 times, and I just changed some other settings on any other plugins. For example, what is on this layer. It's basically the same layer almost, but I just cutted out some other plugins, for example distortion, which is missing right here, so it is a little bit thinner. But instead of being thick like the original lead, I just exaggerated even more with flangers, for example. And something like the reverb automations, I also cut them out to make it more dry and more defined, since it isn't that fat like the original lead, for example. That way I've created another well-fitting lead without even creating new sounds with so much effort. You can even see it on the MIDI. The MIDI is basically the same, like the notes are completely the same, and also the color of the MIDI is the same, because if you duplicate something in Ableton, it just looks the same. The other layer sounds like that. So if I just switch between the layers, and if you look at the effects down there, it starts with an ODT, there is a flanger in both of them, but this layer, for example, has less flangers, and it has the reverb automations, which the other lead also had, like the original lead, these ones. So these are basically the same, almost. For example, this here is different from the side leads, which I've created afterwards, just to give the main lead more importance instead of giving it to the side leads, which are basically there to just support the main lead. This is why I've cut it away from here, for example. And then there are other layers which were basically the same as well, but I've changed them up so much that I even cut out some MIDI parts, so I build up even more and more layers when the melody builds up more and more, if that makes sense. So this one is more squeaky and even more thin, but also very experimental as well. And the last layer is just crazy. I just left the MIDI like it was, and I just made a laser out of it. I remade some of like hexagon style tracks. I also learned that there are a lot of lasers being used, or like abused, if you want to call it like that. But it basically helps to fill up more frequencies within the other layers. So I thought, why not try? And it sounded pretty good, but I didn't want to exaggerate, of course. So I kept it quite low in comparison with all the other leads together. It's very subtle, like on the side somewhere. And I also try to not just begin the whole drop with all layers and to overload the listener's ear. I just at least tried to build it up slightly with these pauses, and then when the listener is already getting used to what he was hearing, then I can play everything at once in this section of the drop. I want to show you a funny thing about automations one more time, just so you can see how many automations there are on my main lead. If I just go through all the automations, you basically, it's very crazy, just to shade the sound. So if you think that your sound is like just sucks or something is missing, bro, just do it. Just take any plugin and just automate something and just turn it off afterwards. I also like to turn off leads, for example, when they aren't needed. If something isn't just needed, I just turn off the channel completely, so no audio signal is coming out. It's basically like if you would bounce it as audio and just cut it out for that measure. And it helps a lot to keep your mixes very clean. That's especially when it comes to bass sounds. I do this technique a lot. Over here, these are like my main basses, which are very fast playing. But I know exactly that if I wouldn't turn off these channels, there would still be like a bass tail somewhere and just interfering with another sample or like bass, which I want to play in that time. So I just turn it off and nothing will happen and it will sound clean. I even got parts where MIDI would be still played, but I just turn it off because you just can't hear it. And just to make space for something cool like a sub drop which goes up and down or any other cool sample, I would suggest to do that a lot. The track No Limits is actually called No Limits because there's a track which is called No Limits by Too Unlimited. So many limits. It was my first EDM track I heard when I was a child. Shout out to my mom. A very cool song and I really like the vocals as well. So I actually wanted to use these vocals or like trying to extract them in any way with EQing and filtering whatsoever, but it didn't work at all. I even tried to sing it in, but it sounded horrible. I even had to delete it for the showcasing project because it was like a quite of a big group which took a lot of CPU as well. So I just deleted it for this matter. But I actually wanted to do that and I tried to clear it as well. But in the end, I had to come to the conclusion that it would be way too expensive to clear the vocals. I mean, you can look it up. It is quite a big track, so I wasn't lucky there. But so you know why the track is actually called No Limits. For the breaks. Before this break even existed, I had another break, which I wasn't really sure about it. And I started to ask a good friend for feedback if he had any like suggestions or like tracks I could check out or like I could get inspired from. This guy's name is Paul Fanger, and this guy has so much knowledge about music and its history. And I really love such people because they just know what is good, you know? They just know what fits with what. He suggested me to listen to the track Eric Pride's Opus. The idea is kind of the same. You start with something very simple, which repeats a lot, and it builds up even more and more. The only difference between Eric Pride's Opus and Heinrich No Limits is that Eric Pride's added a big tempo change automation, which I don't have. I kept the 128 BPM over the whole break because I felt that was better for DJs and sounded better and more unique because I don't want to be a copycat in any way and I just wanted to get inspired. I just left out the tempo change, but I took over the idea of building up a certain theme. So that the break wouldn't be as boring as it is, I tried to build up early something new, which is the bass. It's basically the operator, a stock plugin from Ableton. I just tried to build it up very subtle. Like the filter is starting very, very low and it's incredibly quiet at first, but it gets even louder and more powerful simultaneously when all the other layers are coming as well. So when the bass got louder, I started to add more layers to make it more unique and more sparkly and more different. I started to add, for example, this, percussion to just layer it on the main melody. I even added chords with the same rhythm which had the main lead. And even added another ARP. And I even added a choir to just add more humanity and more epicness. There's also this element with this white noise, which I designed. I took all the details so far that I even took care of delays being in triplets and like really nothing is colliding rhythmically. This is a very cool sample from Omnisphere, which really reminded me of old HEXAGON tracks, which has this old one-shot feeling. And also has human feelings, and these human feelings also build into all the choirs I've added on top of all these layers as well. So when it came down to percussion, I tried to keep it very simple because the actual theme was to be simple at first. I could have taken a good percussion or like something more interesting, but I just took some white noise and I just made it a percussion with some decay, and that's it. What I really like about this section personally is that at the end of the melody I gave it a lot of more movement. It sounds like it would scream after something. So that way I tried to signalize that something is coming, something is screaming for something. That's why I let the lead scream one last time before the actual build up and the drop is coming. This lead is also very, very simple. It's just a saw wave with a lot of post-processing. Without all the effects, it would sound like this. So even if I turn on and off everything, it's almost the same. So it's kind of funny with what kind of basic things you can make something such big. Don't overdo it at your project. Maybe that's a problem which a lot of producers struggle with. They think they have to be very complex and like difficult, but sometimes simpler is better. The only thing which changes in this lead is the delay time of a simple delay. And all the other automations are just there to control it better, so it doesn't exaggerate or like run out of control suddenly. This is why I automate so much, that nothing gets too much and nothing gets too less. Also, what was really hard was to think about the time you have to overcome. I had to be very precise with automations and really thoughtful, very careful as well, so that the vibe doesn't get destroyed just because an automation is going too quick or is changing way too quick. It's like a small spark that you try to make a fire out of, which is very weak at the beginning, and you have to be really careful with it. And also, when I said that I use saturators at quite of an extreme volume and people laughed at me, no, I actually mean it. So I like to exaggerate even with such plugins. I do exaggerate, but I still control it somehow. So it is exaggerated, yes, but it's just there to just give it more something that is missing in a lot of mixes, in my opinion. So without a saturator, it would be like this. With a saturator, it would be like this. It just gives some more crunch, which a usual saw wave just doesn't have. The whole track also feels like coming in waves. So a wave builds up and falls down again. A wave builds up and falls down again pretty regularly. The melody in the drop makes so much waves, like da 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 da. Like a wave is going up and then it falls again. Da 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 da, and it rises and falls again. I tried to take this theme also with affecting reverbs, like in the break. You can see right here that I implemented it as well in the breaks. In such a way that I just add more reverb to it as a wave. I also think that good impacts are crucial for a good EDM track. Also, if you want to pitch up snares naturally, instead of like with a pitch bend, just take a frequency shifter instead. Just increase the fine tune of it as pitching method, because it sounds way cleaner than if you would do it with a pitch automation, in my opinion at least. The reason why the drops are so long is because I had so many ideas for the melody. I just didn't know what to do with my ideas and so much creativity. So I just thought, why not extending the drop another 16 bars? And I also thought of Hell Deep, like Oliver Heldens tracks, which also are really long. So I thought, man, that's a good combination. It's like a hybrid between Psytrance, Future House, and it's also like festivalish and very long, playable and danceable, why shouldn't I try it? But of course I couldn't go on with the main lead over and over again because that would be boring as well. I tried to take all my artistic repertoire in a way. I made a lot of remakes with like synth wops, chord wops, you know. What I did with Fox Stevenson Miss You remix, I can do it as well in this track, just to keep it interesting. To give the transition more interesting sound, I just made the first pitch up of these chord wops with a frequency shifter. It sounds more nasty, more kind of like dubstep sound designish. I just took a frequency shifter to make it more interesting than a usual pitch automation. A normal pitch automation is very clean, but a frequency shifter plays with the sound, so it gets even more interesting. A crucial automation in this sound is of course the filter cutoff automation. As you can see, it's also like in waves. It comes and goes with every little melody section, which is ending again. One part of the track I really like is that I replaced the main bass with a lot of rising and falling basses. From the bottom to the top, the whole track is like moving forwards and backwards. I went nuts on it, you know. Let the whole track shake. To even make it feelable or like listenable for someone who isn't listening to it on good speakers, I've pitched it up and just to make it more audible. I would like to show you the breakdown as well. I got inspired by another very good track, which isn't even house. It's very good alternative rock, which really nailed ambiences in its track. I also wanted to have a transitional element to the break, which I wanted to create, because I really wanted to have something 80-ish in my track. I really love the 80s and like the sound and the feeling it transmits. So I listened to some older tracks which also transmits this feeling, very mystical, and I just built it with my own samples I've created a long time ago, just so I am able to build any ambience I would like. So it sounds like this. So that was a lot of work just to place it and just to fit all these fades correctly so it kind of sounds more balanced and better flowing. I wanted to take it from the right to the center to the left and rotating around your head to give it more vibes to it. The whole breakdown would be nothing if I would leave it out. I've recorded myself breathing in or breathing out, I don't even know anymore, to give it more grime, more humanity, more something of myself into it. But this is something I do quite a lot of time. I also got a track which is called Never Wanna Stop. I whispered on that track myself and it sounded good. The 80s part is really difficult to play because there are a lot of samples going on which are more like high quality samples. It's kind of difficult to play it out. I searched for typical 80s sounds and tried to build them. I can play it out somewhere else in the track so maybe it doesn't crack so much. I tried to build a lot of emotion with it, with building up chords from note 1 to note 10 in a way to just build up these sick emotions. I also searched for a bell which would transmit this 80s feeling. I really love the spark in it. I boosted a lot of high end in it and also cut out some of the low frequencies because there were also many different basses and it got kind of difficult to mix. But I also have to say that I kept it minimalistic with mixing because I know that in the 80s there weren't that many possibilities to mix that detailed like you could today. That was the reason why I said I won't mix it down like a maniac, but I mix it quite okay and leave it authentic for its time. The kick drum in this 80s break was also really interesting to build because I layered 2 kick drums on top of each other. I first had a side kick, which is really on the sides and with some reverb as well, and the main kick drum with some gated reverb to give it a more vintage feeling. I've tried to look at more reference tracks from the old times. Again, you might know Dieter Bohlen or like Modern Talking from Germany. I just looked at the samples which worked really well and tried to find similar samples. That's why my snare sounds so full and thumpy. And in all of these old tracks I noticed that the snares sound really like gated with reverb and really like clashing somehow, but like intended clashing. I added a lot of pre-delay and turned up the dry-wet knob of the reverb pretty high as well, so it feels like you hit the snare and the reverb is coming back like a slingshot. To keep the vibes kind of the same in both of the breaks, I took the choirs from the first break into the second break as well. I filtered them a lot, but I kept them more open than in the first break in order to keep that energy which we had before from the drop more steady than before and to keep the second break going. My 80s bass is made with the operator and some post-processing. Without the effects it would sound like that. I added some OTT and a flanger on 100%. There you can see I exaggerate a lot of times with my effects just to make it more different. This is also the lead of the second break, which is kind of similar to the lead which I've built in the drop, but I've tried to cut it differently with the EQs to give it a more vintage feeling. My intention with this lead was to emulate a guitar or something more acoustic. That's why I've played a lot with the flangers and with overdrives to give it more of an acoustic sound. And I also layered it with another synth, which was also a very similar copy of it, but just pitched up. And playing different harmonies so they both work together, which would fit more the 80s style to give it more like a rock pop 80s feeling. I basically copy and pasted the build-up a second time, but just with the difference that I took another melody of the main lead of the second drop, totally different. I tried to give more variation to the percussion as well. I took my kick drums and my percussion and made more exceptions in the rhythm. So it's like a machine gun. It's way more fun to listen to something that changes again, in my eyes at least. So I've changed the main melody again. The hard work in this case was to change the melody, but when I changed something rhythmically, I had to change all the automations which actually gave the sound its life, to change all the automations again over longer times. I really had to think a lot how I double or like how I half length my automations. My English reaches its limits, you get what I mean. You can really hear it in the second part of the second drop, and I didn't play triplets which were short like da 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 da, but like da 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 da, even longer and longer ones. That was really complicated, especially for these chord wops. When the first drop you can see that these automations work here and there, sometimes a ramp up and that's it. But in the second drop I really had to think differently. The notes are getting longer, therefore the reverb has to get longer and needs more presence, so the vibe of a sound is being kept alive. To the end, I let out the automations. That would be the end of a track anyways. I let it play out as it is, to let it lose more energy again, to just end it in a more technical and dynamic way instead of a beautiful outro. I tried to let it play out rather than with a longer outro. The track was already like 4 minutes long. I just stop it right here, but at least I concluded melodically. And there you go. What I also really like to do in my tracks, to give them a good fade out and also give it some funny effects at the end, like a tape stop. And also what I like to do with my tracks is to set the loop of the ending in such a way that it would continue quite nicely with the beginning again. So if someone is listening on repeat, it blends more nicely together. I saw a lot of tracks. I felt like, why are the ends so weird sometimes? So I really think about a lot of details in my tracks. If you start thinking about such little things, you will also get on different ideas how to make your tracks better. So that's my way of creating a track. I create a track and I don't produce it. I create a track. I have to say my mastering got a little bit simpler over time. Right now it's very simple. Usually my master looks like that today. So I usually master with an OTT, with a saturator and a glue compressor, and in between the saturator and the glue compressor I like to add a mid-side EQ or maybe a multiband compressor, which takes the frequencies around 5K and 3.5K away a bit, just to make it more listenable. At a certain point I always have a master, something that limits the track, quite pushes the track somehow. I like it, I can work with it. If you don't like it or if you can't work with it, that's your choice, but my choice is, or like my workflow is that I need it, therefore I use it. I can play the drop without the master, so you can get a feeling of how much my tracks get pushed by the master actually. When I made this track, I was still thinking about new ways of processing my songs. This is kind of like a V1 or like V2 master. I still tried to fix some things on the master. With an EQ, for example, I boosted some 500 Hz, some high end. But in the end, I could have done it within the other plugins. That's why it looks like there were so many plugins. But basically, 3 points. I distort my masters, I compress them and I EQ them, and that's it. I don't add any magic reverb on it, or I also tried stuff like that, but it just squashes all your tracks. If you make some film music, you can maybe try it. It may sound good, but that's an EDM banger, and you can't have reverb on an EDM banger except it sounds cool or it sounds good. That's like the rule, but I keep things simple and they work. So you can expect a lot of more cool tracks because I learned to produce way faster with a quicker and like cooler workflow, which also sounds quite good. So the last words I would like to say is that I guess the future has some more cool things coming up and I just can't wait for that. I really hope you like this go through. If you have any questions left about the track or like elements or like technical stuff or anything, just ask, please let me know. And I hope to see you on more videos or more songs which are coming up, and I really hope to see you next time.